Hello, nerds. I have a very special guest with me. I've got Marc Berman, who is the California State Assembly member of my district. And he also grew up in where I currently live and went to school where my kids are going to school right now. So I thought it would be cool to have a conversation with Marc to understand like what's going on in California state kind of legislative reform and what's been recent, what's coming up, what's being discussed. Since even though our audience is spread across the country, a lot of times California is a leading indicator for what other states end up adopting years later. So welcome to the show, Marc, and hello, nerds.
Yeah, hello, nerds. Tom, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation. Always great to meet someone else who's living in Palo Alto.
Yeah. Before we went live, you and I were just chatting about how, my son just started at Palo Alto High School. And, I was pleasantly surprised that so far he doesn't seem to be too stressed out, even though there's like a reputation for it. It can be pretty intense. I'm curious, like, are there any education topics that have come up in the assembly, either recently or that you anticipate coming up in the future?
Yeah, lots of education topics, and frankly, youth mental health and making sure that our
Mm.
youth are as hopefully as stress free as possible is a big focus. It's a big focus of mine. The governor just had a big press conference and announcement about it earlier this week, and about $4.7 billion that California will be putting into trying to address issues around youth mental health. I actually had an effort a couple of years ago that got money for youth mental health and suicide prevention training uh,
Mm.
for teachers, administrators, and even students in our middle schools and high schools, because this has been an issue long before COVID. It's been an issue that's been exacerbated by COVID, and we need
Hmm.
to make sure that we support all of our youth, our students, in whatever place they are, and make sure that if they're struggling, that we get them the help they need. So it's a big focus of ours.
Yeah. Do you have any opinion on the youth mental health challenges? Is this something that has always been an issue for generations, and we're just getting better at identifying it, or do you think like just growing up as a kid in today's world is just more challenging?
Yes. I think it's yes to both. I definitely think it's always existed. I was definitely aware of it when I was growing up. And then I think that social media. I was walking my dog this morning and saw a student. I live my wife and I now live in Menlo Park, right by the high school here.
Hmm.
And I saw a female student riding her bike on her phone, and she's riding her
Mm,
bike while she. I was like, when I was growing up, I'd ride my bike, and I
yeah.
would look, and I would talk to friends who were also riding their bikes, and now everybody is just so stuck on some
Hmm.
a digital device. And yeah, I definitely think, I'm not aware of studies. I'm sure they're out there, but things like social media, the ability to take a picture or a video of anything at any time. Tom, I don't know about you, but if that existed when I was growing up, uh, that wouldn't be
We're
very.
probably better off for that. That we missed that technology wave. Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, people must feel like they're always being recorded or kind of being observed, or whatever or maybe they don't realize it, and then when they do, it kind of stresses them out. That's
Yeah,
the other way to think about it too.
and it catches you at your worst. I mean, it can catch you at
Yeah.
your best, but it can also catch you at your worst, and then it can be disseminated really quickly to a lot of
Hmm.
people, and that can create really negative, kind of adverse, experiences
Yeah.
for youth. And those are the kind of things we want to figure out how to avoid, how to kind of limit.
How do we think California is doing around education in general? Do we feel like our kids and young adults are being prepared well for the future?
Not as well as we want. I mean, I think if you look at the data in terms of being able to read, I think reading by third grade and algebra by eighth grade, I believe, are two of the bigger markers that we evaluate. And no, our youth aren't learning at the level that we'd like them to. Over the past 5 or 6 years, we have dramatically increased the amount of funding that we provide for K through 12 education in California. Part of it is pegged to, for a long time, we were some of the lowest in terms of funding per pupil in the country. Now we're getting closer to the middle. We're waiting for the newest data to come out to decide. We're hoping to be in the top 12 or so. So that's a lot of improvement from the mid 40s, where we'd been for a long time. A lot of that's tied to historic ways that we tax in California, Prop 13 and property taxes that used to be higher per assessment of your value. So it's kind of, there are a lot of reasons that we've gotten to where we are. But no, we definitely need to do better. We definitely need to do a lot better in terms of educating our youth.
And do you think it's like, how does the state assembly address this? Clearly, providing additional investments and funding is probably the biggest lever. What's our philosophy on, are there strings attached to the money, or is it more like, hey, each district kind of figures out how to best use it based on their judgment? Or
there are strings attached. There are fewer strings attached than there used to be. We kind of reformed our school funding process before I got to the legislature. So I think it was about a decade ago. I've been in the assembly for 6 years, and created something called the local control funding formula, but also the local, the LCAP, the local control accountability plans. And so now school districts get funding in bigger blocks. It used to be, 40 or 50 different specific types of funding that you'd get, that you'd have to spend that funding in that specific way. Now we give schools bigger blocks. We also do something that I think is important to kind of addressing inequities, which is we give more funding to schools that have greater percentages of students who are on free or reduced lunch, or in the foster system, or are English as a second language students. So it's kind of, trying to provide more funding to where schools and communities have bigger percentages of students who need more funding to get to the same place as other students might get with lower levels of funding.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me wonder about disparities within the state on levels of education. I mean, obviously, you've benefited from some amazing public schools. My kids are benefiting from that now. They're well funded. I'm very impressed, like, with Palo Alto High School's offerings. I was like, whoa, that's pretty good. How do we feel like we're doing for the folks who, don't have as many economic resources in their community? Like, how is the floor in
Yeah.
California?
It's been getting better, but I mean, you hit the nail on the head in terms of some of the inequalities that we have in California, right? I grew up in Palo Alto. I went to Palo Alto public schools, but I had friends. I played soccer pretty competitively, and have friends from surrounding communities, including East Palo Alto, or North Fair Oaks, Redwood City, or even at that point, San Jose. And their school districts, it was clear that they weren't getting the same opportunities that I was, not because I did anything right and they did anything wrong, just by the luck of the draw in terms of the situation you're born into and where you might happen to live. So there's still massive inequality between school districts. You see it between Ravenswood School District, which is East Palo Alto, and Bellhaven, East Menlo Park, versus Palo Alto Unified, or versus the Menlo Park school districts. So there is still mass. And then you've got, and I know, Palo Alto has a very strong education foundation where parents in the community give funding to the foundation that supplements the funding, and that's another way that we have that kind of the inequality gets bigger and bigger, because, maybe parents in East Palo Alto or North Fair Oaks don't have those personal resources to be able to contribute. So we're getting better. We are, we are making a considered effort on increasing funding, and also making sure that funding goes to students in a more equitable way. But there's definitely still room for improvement.
Got it. I can't interview you and not discuss the topic of basic income since a lot of our audience is former Yang Gang. And I'm curious, like, I think there was like a pilot or a trial in Stockton at one point, and just wondering, like, has the discussion of like some form of unconditional basic income come up in the assembly, and where are people's heads at about that?
I'm not sure if there's been a proposal in the legislature. I'll have to go back and look. Definitely not one that's gotten very far yet.
Mm-hmm.
But the Governor Newsom, did hire Michael Tubbs, the former mayor of
Mm-hmm.
Stockton, who now works for the governor, and this is a huge passion of his. So I assume, I haven't connected on that issue with them, but I imagine it's something that they're currently looking at. How can we integrate? Whether it's UBI or certain concepts of it. I also saw a headline yesterday. I haven't read the article yet. It's saved as new in my inbox, about Santa Clara County
Mm.
looking at a basic income pilot project. So the more communities, California is such a diverse state, from Stockton to Silicon Valley to San
Mhm.
Diego, right? And so the more communities that pilot it and the more data we can get about whether it's worked or different improvements that we could make, I think that helps build the case for a statewide program. We typically want to we're typically a little bit conservative, for lack of a better word, before we roll things out to all 40 million Californians.
Sure.
So that but I definitely think there's a lot of openness and interest in, is it working where it's been piloted? And I'm not sure what's going on in Stockton. Former Mayor Tubbs isn't mayor there anymore, so I don't know if their program's continued, but it's definitely something worth diving into a little bit more.
Yeah. One other thing, and I know we have limited time, so there's so many topics I'm curious about. One other thing that I noticed in the headlines was the Alaska elections. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's really cool that they have these open primaries, kind of like we do in California, but then they also do ranked choice voting in the general.
Yeah,
And it seems like you've got this there are certain sort of like independent streaked Republicans who might never have a chance, that now have a chance.
yeah,
And then there are folks like, let's say, like a Sarah Palin, like a real activist on the Republican side, who isn't a shoe-in
yeah,
because she has the appeal to more than just like the hardcore, 25%.
yeah.
And I was curious, within California, is there any discussion around ranked choice voting or other kinds of elective kind of reforms or innovations?
Yeah, there definitely have been. I don't think the governor is a huge fan. I hope that
Hmm.
I hope I'm not divulging state secrets. The administration hasn't been. I want to say he might have vetoed a bill last year or the year before by my colleague Senator Ben Allen, from
Mm.
Southern California, who had a bill, and it must have just been to allow ranked choice. Well, but we have ranked choice voting. I need to go back and look at the specifics. We have ranked choice voting in San Francisco and Berkeley,
Hmm.
in a couple of jurisdictions across the state. There have been efforts to talk about expanding it. Those efforts haven't been, the administration hasn't been super receptive to that. But I did, and I hate to keep on, I sound like a broken record. I just saw this morning an article. There's an article in the LA Times talking, I think it was in the LA Times, talking about Alaska's electoral system and how, again, I still need to read the full article. I hit the headlines, and then when I get time in the weekend, I typically dive deeper into things.
Hmm.
But to see, what impact it's had, I'm always interested in electoral reforms. I chaired the elections committee for 5 years, my first 5 years in the assembly. I'm the author of the permanent vote by mail bill, to have vote by mail be
Mm.
permanent in California, for all active voters, amongst probably a dozen other reforms. So I'm always interested in seeing what are other states doing that work, and are those ideas that we should adopt here in California.
What's the biggest objection? Is it that people feel like it's too confusing for the voter, or what's the why wouldn't people be open to it? I get that you have to explain it, and then it's a new thing.
Yeah,
So I get that part. Is that the main objection, or?
I think that's definitely a part. I think you look at, and not to say that this is something that we should extrapolate too much from, but you look at what happened with the district attorney in San Francisco, where
Mhm.
Chesa Boudin, and I might not be pronouncing his name right, was recalled. And a lot of people made a big deal. Oh my goodness, this district attorney in San Francisco got recalled. But if you look at, they have ranked choice voting in SF. If you actually look at it, it was only 30+%. He was only the first choice of 30+% of
Yeah.
voters in the first
Mhm.
place. So when it's, you've got, so maybe we should have ranked choice. Well, you can't have ranked choice voting for a recall. But when you have just a yes or no, he wasn't necessarily
Yeah.
the favorite of the majority, but when it was ranked choice, he won. So it's not reasons, in my mind, these aren't reasons not to do it. But these are just kind of some of the things that people bring up. I think there have been some examples where people have tried to kind of game the ranked choice voting system, where candidates have.
Mm.
And so, that's an issue that some people have brought up. But I'm intrigued by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super interesting. What are let's talk a little bit about climate.
Mm.
Anything on the horizon or that you're particularly excited about that we recently did to address climate change or climate readiness?
Yeah, I'm definitely excited by what just happened at the federal level with
Yeah.
the Inflation Reduction Act, which I joke might not reduce inflation much, but is going to be a huge boon for combating climate change. In California, we've always seen ourselves as a leader in
Hmm.
terms of setting really ambitious goals. I had a bill last year that you might have heard about. It was probably the hardest bill I've ever run, to ban the sale of new gas-powered small off-road engines in California. So these are gas-powered leaf blowers, lawn mowers. It's a lot
Hmm.
of landscaping equipment. It also includes small portable generators, and this equipment uh, produces or emits smog-forming kind of climate-changing pollutants on par with passenger vehicles. People don't
Mm.
realize how bad these
Right.
things are for the climate, how bad they are for the gardeners and landscaping professionals who use them,
Hmm.
and we all know how annoying they are in terms of noise pollution. So that's something where California, I was barely successful at the bill. Starting January 1st, 2024, businesses will not be able to sell gas-powered leaf blowers or lawnmowers in California. We're the first state in the country to do that, and I've actually had elected officials from other states reach out wanting to learn more. So that's not we also need to, transportation and other areas are massive, sectors of climate pollutants, but we also need to be more creative and be looking at other areas where there's a lot of damage to the climate and figure out what are some creative ways that we can address it. So there's going to be a lot of activity on climate. Our legislative session ends in 10 days, uh,
Hmm.
or 12 days technically, August 31st. And so there's going to be a lot of activity. The governor just came out a week and a half ago with some things that he wants to try to get accomplished in these last 2 weeks of the legislative session, and those include ideas that have been proposed and failed in the legislature in the past, that the governor hasn't really weighed in on. So the fact that he's now saying, "Hey, this is going to be a priority of mine," accomplishing our renewable portfolio standard goals, or making sure that you can't drill wells within a certain amount of space from schools or parks or other places, or doing more to get electric vehicles on the road and get more charging station infrastructure. These are all things that we need to do if we're going to continue to be the leader that we think we are in California.
Speaking of electric cars, I was reading a story yesterday around um, basically the federal tax credit for electric cars for certain Hyundai electric cars is going to be phased out, and I think it's because it requires a car to have been manufactured in the U.S.
Okay.
And I was thinking, like, on the one hand, like, yes, I could totally get that argument why we want to, encourage more domestic production. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, well, that now reduces options for consumers to kind of access cleaner vehicles, more cost effectively. And I was wondering, from a state perspective, do we have a similar approach where the electric vehicle kind of tax incentives are kind of connected to where they're manufactured, and how do we think about that?
I don't think we do.
Yeah.
And there's been talk about trying to create standards around like worker safety, and
Mhm.
worker rights and that kind of thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
But my recollection is it involved a lot of us were asking questions around. Well, we can go in and do site visits for companies in California, maybe companies in other states, probably not, but we definitely can't do it for other countries. So it was kind of
Mhm.
an interest. I mean, a lot of us were wondering about how we implement some of these policies. My guess from the federal level, politics is the art of the practical.
Mhm.
You got to get them. You got to get a
Yeah.
majority of votes, or
Mhm.
or it doesn't happen. And so my guess is that there were certain senators in a 50-50 Senate
Right.
that kind of leveraged that opportunity to put some of those more domestic production clauses in the bills. And that's what we face that also. I mean, with that leaf blower ban bill gas power leaf blower ban bill
Mhm.
that I had, it's first in the nation. It's a really big deal. But I still had a lot of constituents that said, "Why didn't you do it faster? Why didn't you do it more? Why didn't you ban the
Mm.
use immediately?" It's like, well, because I had to get 21 votes in the Senate,
Yeah.
and I got 21 votes in the Senate. There was no room for error. There was no room to push harder. So my guess is that's kind of what happened with
Yeah, probably.
federal policy. Yeah.
What was the motivation for the leaf blower bill? Was it mainly noise pollution, or does it contribute a meaningful percentage of actual, like, smog and carbon production? I would have assumed, there's very much fewer of those than cars driving around, but maybe, to your point, they're highly inefficient. I don't know.
They're highly inefficient. There's actually tens of millions of them in California,
Oh,
when you add them all up. But they're two-stroke engines. They don't have the
yeah, they're like a car from the '80s or something.
exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah,
So reactive organic. Sorry about that. I think that's something on my
no worries.
computer. Reactive organic gases and carbon dioxide. They emit a massive amount of,
Mm.
which are smog forming pollutants. So, but then it was also noise pollution, and then it's also the health of the workers, the health of the people who use them,
Mhm.
and have these
Right.
pollutants spewing up right next to their faces,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
that create a lot of health impacts for folks.
Now, was there a lot of pushback from landscaping companies saying, "Hey, now I gotta buy these electric things. It's gonna cost me money. I'm gonna have to pass that along." Like, how did you
A
what
massive
was the
amount.
objections like? Yeah.
A massive amount of pushback. And so one thing that we did is we got $30 million in the budget to create a state program to provide financial incentives for small landscaping companies and sole proprietors, because there's upfront. It's just like an electric vehicle. There's more
Mhm.
upfront cost, but you save money in the long run, uh,
Yeah, I
especially
would
with the
imagine.
cost of gas going up as much.
Fuel, yeah, mhm.
Exactly. So getting $30 million in the budget, we're trying to get more money in the budget this year, helps kind of alleviate some of the financial burden on folks, especially the upfront financial burden. And then a lot of there was actually more pushback from national associations,
Mm.
because they're worried about these policies being adopted in other states,
Yeah.
and kind of California proving the concept. So that told me that we were on the right path when there wasn't as much pushback from California associations or companies,
Mhm.
from national associations. I was like, this is what California should do. We should push the envelope and try things, and hopefully in this case prove that it works, and then see that adopted across the rest of the country.
Last topic, Mark, is I saw Governor Newsom talk about enhancing California's ability to access water and, like, desalination plants and things like that. How are you feeling about how we're going to be ready for, like, a prolonged drought, or decreasing access to water that we normally have?
As I look out on my like straw yellow yard, that we haven't watered in months,
Hmm.
We are not ready. We are absolutely not ready. And I don't think we could have anticipated the impacts. Well, some people definitely did anticipate the impacts of climate change on drought. But we are in the middle of the most severe drought we've had in California's history. So I definitely support the governor's push. I think we need to put more funding into rainwater capture, water recycling. He's making a big push on desalination. I had a chance to visit Israel a couple of years ago, which is a country. It's a desert, but they managed to use their water more efficiently and create more potable water that they can use for more purposes. And so I think that's something that I understand the environmental concerns, but I do believe it's something that can be done in an environmentally sensitive way. So, and we have to, because I don't think, I pray we get a good wet year this year, but I think we should expect that this is, years like 2020, 21, 22 are going to be more the norm, and less the exception. So I definitely think that it has to be a huge push.
Well, Marc, it's been a pleasure having you on. There's so much going on in the world and in California, and exciting to hear, these like little experiments that are kind of percolating, maybe within the state and then across the state and then throughout the country. So much like Silicon Valley, like we're always seeing a few years ahead sometimes, right?
Exactly right. And improve it here and then scale it.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
the goal. So,
well, thanks for having me, for coming on to the show and giving us some of your time and perspective. And with that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.